Prince Edward Island is a land shaped by the sea, its shores a tapestry of natural beauty and history. But this fragile edge of Canada is under threat. Coastal erosion, accelerated by climate change, is transforming PEI's landscape, putting homes, ecosystems, and history at risk. Hi, and welcome to PEI. My name is Judith Mendiolea, and today I want to invite you to explore this natural phenomenon with me, the risk it represents for islanders, and what the scientific community needs to say about it. Erosion is a natural process where wind, water, and ice wear away the land. On PEI, the island's soft geology, made of clay and sandstone, makes its coastlines particularly vulnerable. But in recent decades, the natural process has accelerated.
Coastal erosion is the degradation of our land. Erosion kind of refers to the loss of that, especially here on PEI. We're a small island. We have a lot of agricultural land, so I think any loss of land is a pretty big hit.
Using tools like drones and PEG measurements, scientists are studying these changes in detail, identifying areas most at risk. Climate change has become the great accelerator of erosion in PEI. Warmer winters mean less sea ice, which once protected the coast. And the storms like Hurricane Fiona are growing more intense. Today is November 26, 2024. I find myself in Victoria Park, and as you can see behind me, there's no trace of ice nor snow in the shore. The loss of sea ice is a game changer. Without it, our coastlines are exposed to wave action year-round. We don't get that big freeze around PEI anymore, and actually, when now we do get freeze, it is more of a problem, because that ice breaks up and then it helps to erode the coastline even quicker, as it is getting chunks of ice thrown up against it.
I mean, erosion is, it can be something that occurs incrementally, year over year, little bits by bits, but the way it tends to occur is, we call it through episodic events. In other words, by big events, big storms, for example, will take big chunks out of the earth and cause that type of erosion. So it tends not to be something where it kind of eats away incrementally. It's these big chunks that happen every few years or so that have a big impact. And what we're seeing as a result of climate change is that those big events are happening more frequently.
In September 22, Hurricane Fiona brought the realities of coastal erosion into sharp focus. With winds of up to 140 kilometers per hour and massive storm charges, the hurricane left a trail of destruction across Prince Edward Island. Roads were washed out, power lines were downed, and entire ecosystems were disrupted. The storm accelerated erosion in many areas, reshaping the coastline dramatically. Among the many casualties of Hurricane Fiona was the teacup stone. In a single night, Fiona's relentless waves swept it away, leaving behind only memories and a stark reminder of nature's power to reshape the land we hold dear. For homeowners, erosion isn't just a natural process, it is a personal crisis. Land disappears, insurance costs rise, and property values plummet.
After Fiona, originally I thought we might have lost around 10 feet. Now looking today, it's quite possible we've lost more. At least 10 to 12 feet we lost at beachfront. Our neighbors just previous to Fiona, about a year before Fiona hit, they spent quite a bit of money and did beach mitigation. It did make a huge difference. You can see the difference that it has made. They sustained almost no damage. They weathered the storm very well.
While some residents can afford to move or protect their land, others are left in precarious situations, highlighting the inequities of erosion's impact.
They use island sandstone, large, tons of stone, and then they put it's like a fabric, and then they put heavy sandstone over the top of that.
While an out-of-province couple looking for $1 million beach house might be able to afford a big wall stone to protect their property, a homeowner whose house has been passed down generations doesn't have the same options. not to mention the disruptive nature these structures can have.
For our department, we don't recommend armoring as a first alternative for people who live along the shore. There's a number of negative consequences associated with it. It changes the aesthetics of living close to a beach. It changes the look, especially if imported material is used. Armoring can have a negative impact on coastal habitat. So species that live in coastal areas can be negatively impacted by those installations. And armoring can also result in changes to the beach. So the wave impacts the wave action that hits the beach, for example, when it hits armoring, that energy has to go somewhere. And so often what will happen is the beach below that armoring will become narrower and narrower to the point where there is no more beach.
I think it's interesting when we look at hard armoring on Prince Edward Island. We are armoring at a rate of about 7.5 meters a year, which is substantial. And so I think where the question is why are we armoring, right? And what are we armoring? Now, armoring gets a bad rap. It's just, not a nature-based solution. We're using materials that aren't local to Prince Edward Island, and we are disrupting coastal processes perhaps when we do this. But there are vital pieces of infrastructure that require us to protect them. We're looking at bridges or roadways for emergency management services, particularly if it's a single lane in and out, as it is in Surrey or Lennox Island. So hard armoring has its uses and definitely does have its places. But the problem with hard armoring is that it stops wave movement, but it doesn't dissipate that energy, so that energy goes somewhere else. So an individual throwing up a piece of hard armoring in front of their property is problematic because it moves the wave action to their neighbour's property, and if their neighbour is not in a socio-economic situation where they can hard armour themselves, then the problem is exacerbated.
Adding to the problem is a lack of transparency in real estate transactions. Realtors aren't required to disclose prior flooding or erosion risk.
So when we originally purchased the property, there was no indication that beach erosion was an issue in this area. So now we're faced with a decision on whether or not we put the money out to do that, or do we sell the property. It's the next year or so we'll have to make a decision on what we're going to do.
I don't know. We might not have purchased the property had we known we'd be in for this.
I'm standing in one of the very shorelands of urban Charlottetown, just beside Queen's Elizabeth Hospital. Now this place looks nothing like it used to do a few years ago. It was covered with hard armoring, and we can even still find some of those rocks left behind. This Living Shoreline project replaced a failed seawall. Today, it's thriving, showing how working with nature can protect our coast sustainably.
If I were a homeowner living on the water, there are a few steps I would take to protect myself from those consequences of erosion. The first one is to leave any vegetation, whether it's grass or trees or shrubs that are there, and they might be obstructing my view, but they're doing such a service that it's so worth it to just leave them where they are. What they're doing is holding that material and that land in place, so that when you're getting extreme weather, when your property is receiving wave energy, it's holding it together and slowing down that loss of material.
So talking about how the role that roots play especially in sand dunes. So that marram grass, the Latin name for marram grass is Ammophila, and Ammophila literally translates as sand lover. So the marram grass, it roots in the sand. Sand piles up and covers the grass, and then the grass grows up through it, and the sand covers the grass and it grows up again. So if you could imagine cutting through the sand dunes, taking like a great big knife, and Fiona did that for us, took a big knife and peeled the dunes away. Inside those sand dunes, you'd see a network, like a skeleton of roots that's holding that sand together.
These projects don't take a big space within properties, and as we can see, can cohabitate with the urban landscape.
There are a couple considerations for homeowners who live near the shore. One is there are rules about how close you can build near the coastline. And if the erosion rate is a certain level, if it increases, if you're in a higher erosion rate area, your setback will increase. In other words, you'll have to build farther inland as a result.
PEI regulations require a 15-meter buffer zone along the coast, but enforcement is inconsistent. Violations often result in fines that wealthier landowners can afford to pay.
At the end of the day, if somebody wants to cut a tree down on their property to enhance the view, that gets reported and investigated, and it's found that they are in the wrong, all they really face is a fine. And for some people living on the waterfront, that might not be a very strong deterrent. Additionally, they could apply for a permit to do work in the buffer zone, and if that gets approved, they could go ahead with it.
So when salt marshes are filled in, so imagine you're filling in a salt marsh and maybe, putting a bunch of cottages on it instead, that land can no longer act like a sponge, and those homes or cottages are more at risk. Sand dunes act like a crumple bumper on a car. So if you think if your car hits something, that bumper absorbs all the energy and it protects you and your passengers in the car. Sand dunes do the same thing. So again, they're important to protect in the landscape, because if you were to build on those dunes, you're taking away that crumple bumper that we have.
In 2023, the Canadian Centre for Climate Change and Adaptation at UPI released 16 key recommendations to guide shoreline management in Prince Edward Island. These recommendations aim to protect the coastline while balancing development and conservation.
Our hope was that with both of these reports we would be able to come up with an adaptation plan and a solution that would allow us to treat the coast in a respectful way. The whole island cannot be treated as one, and so our goal here within the State of the Coast and the recommendations report is to break the island up into 14 littoral cells, which allows us to deal with the land use planning, the coastal protection, and the abilities and the ways that we can help ourselves and help our coast within those specific areas.
Managing erosion requires more than coastal policies. It demands comprehensive land use planning, but outdated regulations often allow development too close to the water. Other key recommendations include expanding buffer zones, making coastal hazard closures mandatory for real estate transactions, and enforcing stricter penalties for environmental violations. The goal is a long-term coastal management framework that safeguards PEI for future generations.
Our department is initiating a pilot project that will see the development of shoreline management plans for select areas in PEI. So things like, what are the different shore types? What is the sediment movement like in that area? Are there species at risk? If there's any designated land use. We also have a service that our department provides. It's called the Coastal Hazard Assessment. And any property owner can make a request to the department, and we will provide a brief assessment of what the past erosion has been on that property and what the flood hazard is. It's free. It can be requested online.
To address the growing challenges of coastal erosion, PEI has developed innovative tools like CLIVE and CRIS. These systems provide islanders with a clearer understanding of how climate change and erosion impact their communities. Using CRIS, we can identify the parts of the island that have a higher risk of erosion, and therefore develop management plans that can help us to assess each targeted shoreline in a different manner. Meanwhile, CLIVE, the Coastal Impact Visualization Environment, uses 3D modeling to simulate how erosion and sea level rise could reshape PEI over the next 50 years. In the end, erosion might just be a part of PEI's history, but just as it has shaped that history, it may take it away. Using CLIVE's projections, scientists have discovered 15 different lighthouses that will need to be moved in the next decade. The East Point Lighthouse is one of those whose life is being endangered.
When we were kids, we used to go to the beach on the north side of East Point.
At 40, 50 years ago, there was an actual road there that you could actually drive a vehicle down. And on the water side of the road, there was a post there. On the water side of that, there was also a significant amount of land that you could walk around. Well, you can see now that's all gone. Fascinating to see, to kind of observe what Mother Nature can do. And Mother Nature always gets her way. But it's also heartbreaking to think of what it was, 40, 50 years ago and what it is today.
The shape of East Point has consistently changed through erosion. Brooks which were 6 or 7 feet deep 70 years ago are now merely a trickle. Diligent Pond, which used to harbor ships, is now a landlocked pond. 40 years ago, there was a sandy area instead of the rocks. No one knows what changes in natural history the next 100 years will bring.
Those were the words of Bernard Cherary, local East Pointer, and Stuart McIntyre, the lighthouse keeper in 1926. Today, almost 100 years later, the question pops up again. What will the next century bring, and what will be washed away by the tide?